My name is Andrew Harvey, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to be able to present to you someone who is immensely precious to me, someone whom I hold sacred, Dorothy Walters. Dorothy has been my friend for 20 years, someone on whose wisdom I have relied, someone on whose love I have grounded my life. And I consider Dorothy to be the greatest living mystic poet. That's a very grand claim, but over the years, as she has poured out her soul in book after book of astringent, pure, radiant poetry, Dorothy has assumed, I believe, the very highest place of contemporary visionary poets. I first met Dorothy when I was giving a class on Rumi at the California Institute of Integral Studies. This quiet, shy, seemingly ordinary woman came into my study, sat down, and proceeded very gently to tell me of the absolutely extraordinary experiences that had transformed her inner life. And I immediately knew that she was genuine because she spoke with such reverence and such humility of the way in which the beloved had come to her. And at the end of that meeting, out of her bag, Dorothy took some poems and very shyly presented them to me. My heart sank because I have been presented so many mediocre manuscripts, and of course I thanked her. And when she left, I began to read them, and I can still remember the light coming through the windows and the great feeling of exultation that rose in my heart as I read them, because I knew that not only were these poems genuine, they were absolutely original, and they spoke from the heart of a burning experience of God. And so, my darling Dorothy, welcome. Welcome to this conversation in which we're going to explore how you came to be able to write these poems. But first, what I want to do is to read to you the 4 poems that I read in that room that subtly changed my life and made me aware of what God had given you to give to us. This is called, Miss Walters, Drowning in God. And it has an epigraph from Rumi, who is our shared beloved. Those drowned in God want to be more drowned. Everything in, nothing held back, not the bewildered face in the mirror, the memory of the first time, the quarrel and reconciliation. This wind will sweep you from yourself, the way clouds absorb an ocean, the way fire seeks out the marrow of flame. When it is over, you will be less than a bit of twisted weed, smaller than a splinter of sea-blackened wood. You will not miss your lost possessions, nor even remember their uses. When someone shows you your cast items, your familiar appendages and agendas, even your flashing ornaments, you will look puzzled and ask, what are these? Their functions or relevance? I have drunk from a deep well. What are these sips you offer just for the taste? I'm looking for a world sky deep in water. And that's just the beginning. And this poem, which you know is not my favorite because I love so many of the poems that you're now collecting into your selected poems some kiss we want, but this is the poem I identify with most of everything you've written. It's called God's Mistress. The other bears his ring and name. I lurk in doorways clothed in shadow, waiting for a touch so intense I no longer care what they call me or whisper about in the kitchens. I am the wanton who keeps close company with what the fathers denounce and the many shun, when God comes calling on his whore, the sidewalks empty and all curtains close. And this is the one that I would say was my second favorite of all the poems you've written, which I also identify with. It's called The Secret. I carry it around like a flower or a flame, concealed under a dark canister, its glass so thick no light can pierce its black skin. Sometimes I think I am no better than some Caliban raving in his cave, conjuring visions, or an ordinary housewife who plays harlot by night. Sometimes I think I grow tired of my burden, want to set it down. Let someone else bear this cargo of love. And then this one. We met in the atmosphere of Rumi. And for both of us, Rumi has been the ultimate sign of what a human being can achieve if he or she allows himself or herself to be possessed by the flame of the passion of God and allows for the great wind of inspiration that comes from the divine to flow through them. And I've often said to myself this first line, that's this poem, which is, Jalaluddin, what have you done to me? Because I know that for both of us, this relationship with him has been such an overwhelming relationship at moments, one in which we've been taken into the depths of the pain and the ecstasy of the divine experience. This is called A Hollow Throat. Jalaluddin, what have you done to me? I have given you everything, but nothing has prepared me for this. First you took my jewels, my jade ankle bracelets, my sapphire bands, leaving behind only a tracing of light to mark where they had been. Then my veils dropped, one by one in a sweep of silk. How could I protect this nothingness I had become, this crystal abyss? Before, when you came, you wore a vague plume or turban, making you seem real, a being more like me, or else invisible. You opened the hidden passages by silence or breath, or a movement like flowers swaying under water. Even then the secret bliss waves were partly mine, and I knew who I was. Now everything has dissolved to music, a single note from a struck Tibetan bowl, like a hollow throat gathering the world into itself. Even this I could have borne, but there was no instrument or bell, only a single pure tone rising through this woman before me, universe beginning, loud primordial hum, as I, as no one, was entered, sounded, as a current moved through my body like God. I would love to spend the rest of this hour just reading to you, because these poems have become flesh of my flesh. And I want to say how grateful I am for the extraordinary journey that you've taken so humbly and in many ways so hiddenly to be able to offer us at 86 your selected poems, which are a series of diamonds strung on the invisible thread of the Divine Mother. Thank you, Dorothy. And I'd just like to begin by asking you, where do you feel at this moment in your life, bringing out these poems? Where do you feel you are now?
Well, to bring out the selected poems after many, many years of writing is, of course, a time of celebration and closure and fittingness. I'm thrilled that this is happening, and like so many of the good things in my life, the suggestion comes from Andrew Harvey. Andrew, whatever I possibly represent in my life at this time or any other time, you are responsible for.
Oh,
You are the one who told me to write poetry. I had written a few poems tentatively. They were not terrible poems, but they weren't the greatest. And you said, go forth and write a book of poems. And I was very in awe of you, and I said, Andrew has spoken.
I wish other people would take
I
my
know.
advice.
I don't know what your secret was. Anyway, it worked. And I wrote the first book of poems, which in a way is maybe the favorite of all. I don't know. So how do I feel? I guess I would have to say I feel triumphant.
Ah, bravo.
I did it.
Yes.
You know, and even this forthcoming collection, which will be selected poems, is coming forward at your instigation. You're the one who said it was time to do this. So I'm glad I've done it. It's a summing up. It's a reconciliation. It's a rethinking, revisioning, and re-experiencing many, many years of writing. So thank you, Andrew.
It really is an autobiography of your soul's journey.
Of that part of my life, that's true.
It is, I
It
think,
is.
unexampled like that, because you can read each poem individually, and of course they're all very potent and powerful. But when you experience slowly and savoringly each poem, and then you realize that each poem is a different facet of this diamond of
True.
awakening that has been
True.
turned to you. And then when you finish the book, which I've done at least 8 times because I've read it again and again and again. I've read them all before, but I've read them all together again and again and again. What you feel you have lived through is the inmost distilled secret truth of an amazing soul's journey to union with God.
Well, I think you offered a key phrase there. This was a secret journey.
Yes.
It was a secret journey. It was not shared with almost anyone for years and years and years until I encountered you. And as we spoke last night, you saw me as I was, and not anyone else had really done that before. So that's why the poems are especially valuable to me, because they recount a secret life.
Yes.
A secret life.
And so many people on this earth are having this awakening at this
Yes.
moment, and so many people
Yes.
have this secret life that they can't share.
Yes.
And that's why getting out these poems is so important to me, because I know that if people have the grace and the luck and the good fortune to come to these poems, which are both very profound and very simple,
Very simple.
then their own secret life will be confirmed, and they'll be inspired to claim the truth of their own realization.
I hear this from people, and I find that people who have made a similar journey, maybe not the same journey.
It's never the same journey.
No
yes.
two journeys are the same.
Yes.
But people who have been on a journey, a deep and profound spiritual journey, resonate with these poems. If
Yes.
people have not had meaningful spiritual experience of the kind that's reflected in this book, these poems just whistle right by them.
Yes.
They mean nothing. So, but you're absolutely right. There's a growing body of folk who are having their own kinds of awakening. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And I think it's happening all over the globe, don't you?
I do. I think it's part of this time's
Part of
deep
our
secret
time.
that there's a great death taking place, but also an immense mystical birth, a birth that's
Absolutely.
having to take place to empower us to be able to change the planet and our way of
Absolutely.
acting.
I believe that the planet is falling apart and reconstructing itself all at the same time. I don't know how
Exactly.
that's possible, but that is what's happening.
The goddess can do anything, can't
Well,
she?
that's true.
Dorothy,
true.
let's go a little bit into the life that shaped
All
you,
right.
because I would love people to know a little bit about this journey.
All right.
So where were you born?
All right. I was born in a town called Edmond, Oklahoma.
Edmond,
Now, Edmond, Oklahoma was about 18 miles away from the metropolis of Oklahoma City. Now, Edmond was a
The
town
Paris of Oklahoma.
of possibly 2,500 population. But Edmond did have some, I can see now why it would be a good place to be born. First of all, because it was still new, it wasn't raw, but it was still a new town, because Oklahoma had only been a state for a few years. I grew up very near the countryside.
Ah, yes.
And that was very important to me as a child. And at that time, children were allowed to go out and explore the woods and the fields on their own. There was no danger. And I and my little friends would go out on these little treks. And I realized, for me, each time we went out into the woods, I felt I'd gone into paradise. And I did not realize it at the time, but looking back, I realized that I literally went into an altered state of consciousness. And it was very beautiful, and I retained that capacity long into adulthood. So nature itself was very important to me. That was the first advantage of growing up there. The second advantage was that although it was a small town, it had a little college. And this little college was a teacher training institute. At that time, there was a great need for teachers to go out into the state and to the rural areas. So it was a teacher training institute. And the advantage of that was that it had a marvelous children's library.
Wow.
And as soon as I could read, my mother took me up to the library. I got my library card, and that's the story of my life thereafter.
Yes.
That's what happened.
So really, your childhood was spent being inspired by these altered states in nature, and also by what you were reading,
What I was
what you were
reading.
diving into.
So I, as I say, I read my way through childhood. It was my escape. It was my way. And I didn't have a horrible childhood like many people do, and I did not suffer terrible abuse or anything like that. But there were certain constraints that were put on children at that time. You must behave in thus and such a way. You must be a little lady. You must dress a certain way. You must look a certain way. And all that sort of made me squinch up inside. So my escape hatch was reading books, and I read books until I grew up and, as somebody said, predictably took a PhD in English. But before I reached that stage, and adolescence, when I was about 14 and 15, there was a series of books called the Great Classics, and they even used that as a model for certain curricula, such as at the University of Chicago. And I didn't, of course, this was the Depression,
Right.
and we couldn't afford books a set of books like that. But I found out the names of those books, and I was able to read them on my own. And at that age, I found, and this college had an adult library as well as a child's library. And so I was able to read some of the great masters. And I was able to read, Plato and Dante and Goethe and Tolstoy and so forth.
In Edmond, Oklahoma,
Absolutely.
you were reading these supreme masterpieces.
All alone, without instruction, without guidance. My teachers were qualified for the level that they were teaching, but they didn't read the great books. They didn't know anything about the great books. But I had found the great books, and it was like a treasure that unfolded. And then when I was about 16, and I was still in high school, but we were allowed, the brighter students were allowed to go ahead and start taking courses up at the college. And I started my college courses at that point, and I had, my first class was English, was writing, was the first, freshman
Creative
freshman
writing.
composition.
Yeah.
And my teacher was a jewel because she was a transcendentalist. Now we had Emerson and Whitman in my home library, and I had read them, and I was already a transcendentalist. I didn't know it, but I was.
Yes.
And she also was a member of what they call the Church of Christ Scientists. And of course, that is a vision of the world which is remarkable. Most people don't understand it. They think it's just about healing without doctors, but it involves a lot more. But the main thing was she looked upon literature and writing and words as a sacred occupation.
As a form of revelation, even.
Revelation. And she was in awe of the poets and the poetry. And of course, I drank that in my heart. And I was much, much inspired by her. And I actually underwent, looking back, I can say this, I underwent a kind of classic Christian conversion experience. And which is to say, and again, I had no words for it, but which is to say, suddenly the world was beautiful.
Yes.
I loved everyone and everything in it. And I perceived absolutely that the meaning of life, the purpose of life, was not to acquire wealth and fame and occupation, that there was something else, something much higher that we needed to connect our spirits to. And I feel very fortunate now that I got that. I got it at that age. Some people get it much later, but they have to go through a lot of agony and suffering before they do. So I did that, and I read these books, and then at the proper time, I went on to the State University. Now, the college experience is one thing for some people who go to private schools, and they're part of a group, and they connect with people and their activities, and they feel part of the college. I went to the State University of Oklahoma, whose primary focus was literally on football and the parties that took place, and fraternities and sororities. And I remember once the president appeared before the legislature pleading for funds, and he said, "I would like to build a university that our football team can be proud of."
You were really in the center of America.
So
right?
I lived a very lonely and isolated life.
Right.
I lived in a little rooming house for girls, and I met 4 girls who lived there also, and that was pretty much the extent of my connection with, and then I spent a lot of time in the library. Well, let's skip over. Like a lot of young people, I didn't quite know what to do with my life at that point, what I was qualified to do. And a few years later, I began graduate school in English. Now, it may seem strange to some people for me to say this, but it is true, that the University of Oklahoma at that time had, I'm convinced, one of the most outstanding English departments in the country. It was
how wonderful
brilliant,
and lucky for you that
how
you were
lucky
there.
for me.
Yes.
It was a brilliant teaching faculty. And I just imbibed the wisdom that they imparted. And I loved the time there. And I loved my fellow students. It was almost like, looking back, I could almost say it was like one of those groups that reincarnate together.
Yes, like a cohort of
like
souls.
a cohort. And we learned from each other, and
How
we
marvelous.
had fun together, and we partied together, and wrote brilliant papers together. And it was a wonderful experience. And I stayed as long as I could. You know how you were the
Yes.
perpetual student.
Yes.
And I knew that whatever was out there, that this was better. So I stayed as long as I could, which was 7 years. And then I came to Boulder. And
That was your first visit to
first-
Boulder, wasn't it? In the old days when Boulder
yes,
was
and this would have been 1950.
What was Boulder like then?
It was paradise.
Ah.
It was a world unto itself. It had about half the population it has now, had very little traffic, had very little development. It just, and of course the mountains were there.
God,
And
yes.
I had the good fortune to be hired as an instructor along with 3 other wonderful fellow students of mine, and we came out together. And of course we were wild with excitement because we'd never really
Been
had-
out of Oklahoma,
out of
really?
Oklahoma,
Yes.
where the rivers always ran red. You know,
Right.
I'd never seen a clear stream before.
Wow.
Certainly, I'd never been in touch with mountains before like this. And for me, it was again a paradise. And at that time, and this may seem strange, but the vibrations of the city were different. The vibrations have changed for Boulder. They've changed for other cities here and across the world. And I'm afraid that a lot of people coming along at this time won't even know what the vibrations were like in those early times. But anyway,
so clean, so pure, so
clean,
vibrant.
so pure,
yes.
so exciting, so
Yes.
thrilling.
Well, it was that moment when Eastern thought was coming in
Well,
such an exciting
not
way.
just yet. It was beginning to filter in a little bit. But because we were in the university, and of course we felt ourselves superior to everything,
course, yes.
including Eastern thought.
At that moment, yes.
At that moment, we really didn't pay much attention to it. We knew that there was an Eastern school being set up in Boulder, but we had nothing to do with it. Who would want to fiddle around with all that foolishness? And so, but we had wonderful picnics up in the mountains and drank too much wine. And don't know how we ever got down from the mountain, but nothing terrible ever.
Where did you go after Boulder?
Well, after Boulder, I went to Kansas,
Yes.
which would seem like the most desolate destination in the world.
Well, you are the other Dorothy from Kansas. I've always teased you that you are what
I
Dorothy
know.
would have done after she returned to Kansas.
I am Dorothy from Kansas, that's
You are
true.
Dorothy from
and
Kansas.
I spent 21 years there.
Yes.
But what saved me was a beautiful personal relationship, plus the fact that this is when feminism and women's studies were
Right.
just getting started. And we set up, my colleagues and I, and there were a lot of very bright people teaching in Wichita, because it was so hard for women to get jobs any place in a highly prestigious school. So we set up a women's studies program.
It's actually the first, wasn't it?
No, not the first. It was one of the first. One of the very first. But people are always astonished, and they say, in Kansas? And I say, yes, and the women of Kansas were really ready for it.
Wow.
And they beat a path to our door, and we were eminently successful, and our classes and our fame grew, and we had wonderful students coming into us, and I got to be the director of that program.
So you caused real radioactive mischief in Kansas.
Oh, we did.
Yes.
And we had a motto that served us well. As we set up this program, we knew if the other faculty, the patriarchal faculty, got wind ahead of time what we were up to, they would immediately put a quietus on it.
Kibosh, yes.
So what we said, our motto was, forgiveness is easier to obtain than permission.
Forgiveness is easier to obtain than permission. I
And
love
so we
that.
went
I'm
ahead
going to
and
remember that.
did our thing, and we let them deal with it as best they could, and they tried every way in the world to wipe us out. And I had to take the flak because I was the director of the program.
Gosh.
But the fact of the matter is, I was the only one with tenure.
So you could get away with it.
We could get away with it.
How wonderful.
So I was in Kansas for, in all, 21 years. But before I left, this experience occurred that truly changed my life.
Well, let's slow down here, because
radically.
this is the moment. This is the key moment in many ways of your whole life.
That's true.
Because in 1981, in Kansas, the director of women's studies had an experience which totally changed her vision of the world, didn't it?
That's true.
And this experience is an experience that has activated everything that has created you and that has enabled you to pour out these extraordinary
That's true.
poems. So Dorothy, take a deep
breath.
and share with us
right.
this experience.
All right.
And when it happened and how it happened.
Okay. I went to Kansas in, I'll have to think here. Well, anyway, in 1981, after I'd been there for 10 or so many years, I was living a good life. As I said, I had a good relationship. I had an ideal job.
Right.
It was perfect. I loved what I was doing. I loved the women that I was working with. And then something happened. And then my relationship seemed to be about to fall apart. Well, I had had several heartbreaks in my life. In fact, that's one of the major themes of my life, because I am always old faithful. I'm always looking for the till death do we part connection. and other people didn't seem to be that way. Unfortunately,
I sympathize.
you understand what
Well,
you understand.
You know that I do, yeah.
The scenario.
Yes, I do.
And I had sworn I would never put myself in that position again, but I had. So the relationship seemed to be falling apart. And I was quite devastated, but I determined I was not going to try to interfere with this other person's path. What she needed to do, she could do. And I wasn't going to stand in the way of that. But in so doing, it was like I sacrificed all personal intention. It was like I sacrificed all purposeful action, that I just simply stepped out of the picture. And I think it would be...
You died.
I did. I died a really deep death. And I think it would be permissible to call it an ego death, because that's how it felt. I felt like
you were annihilated in the
I was truly annihilated.
Yes.
Well, while I was in that state, I happened to be reading a book by an author whom I much admired, and that's William Irwin Thompson.
Ah, yes.
Now, Thompson had some familiarity with Eastern thought, but he was not of the East. He was of the West. He was a cultural historian of the West, and somehow it made me feel more comfortable to read somebody.
Be a guide into this larger field.
Well, he had this book, which is called The Time Falling Bodies Take to Light. Now, in that book, he mentioned Kundalini. He wrote about it for possibly 2 pages. It was not a guide on how to do this. It was not about anything except that there was something called Kundalini.
And what is the Kundalini? Do explain, because
well, I'm not. Let me do that a little bit later,
okay,
because
darling.
I was totally naive at the point.
Right.
I had no idea what Kundalini was.
Right.
I'd heard of it. I'd heard that there was this, quote, snake, which, quote, lived at the bottom of your spine, that you were supposed to raise this snake up, and it would proceed through wheels, and if it would reach the crown, if after you practiced for years and years and years, got yourself ready to go, then your crown would open, and it would be like 1,000 lotus petals opening.
Wow.
And for some reason, it came to me, odd as it may seem, oh, I can do this.
You felt it that naturally. You felt that you could do it.
I said, I can do this.
Right.
I can do this. So I sat down in a different chair. I started focusing. I soon developed a ball of energy, as the Tai Chi teachers call it, in the lower chakras. I had no word for the lower chakras, but there was a ball of energy in my lower abdomen, and I thought, aha. Also, at the time, what Thompson had mentioned was that during the process, the initiation process, the initiate was to hold in their hands a vajra and a bell. And I believe I was holding those at this time. A vajra? Where would I get a vajra? But I found literally a vajra in my house, which was a glass vajra, probably intended as a napkin holder or something.
God.
And then I had to find a bell. And the bell, I had no bell, except a little bell that was about 1 inch high. And I thought, well, a bell is a bell is a bell. Actually, I'm not sure I was holding
the
those.
The goddess will understand. Yes.
The goddess would understand.
Yes.
Actually, I think I held those later. But during this process that I'm about to describe, I had this ball of intense, blissful energy in my lower chakras. And I thought, now, I've got to get these up into my head. How do I do that? So I started breathing as deeply as I could, and with intention, thinking about, I've got to get these into my head. I've got to get these. Well, before I knew it, these energies literally shot into my head.
Oh.
They shot into my head in an ecstatic way. My whole brain filled with ecstasy. And it was like 1,000 petals opening, because I thought, aha, that is why they use this metaphor. It's like impulse after impulse after impulse.
Throbbing open,
throbbing
open,
throbbing
open. Yes.
In a very, very wonderful and pleasurable and ecstatic sense. And that happened for a while, and then I thought, I really don't know what I'm doing here.
Yes.
This could be very dangerous. and I'd better stop. So how long that moment lasted, I'm not sure. A few minutes, perhaps. But I had a realization that came to me, and the primary realization was we actually do not exist at all. We think we do. We think we are separate entities unto ourselves. The only truth, the only real existence is this vast, immeasurable, indescribable energy that impels the entire universe. And we're just one tiny, teeny, weeny little aspect of that. That's all we are.
A wave of that great ocean. It's like a...
Well, we're not even a wave.
We're a wavelet. We're a little droplet of a wave.
We're a little droplet of a wave.
Yes.
And that came to me, that insight. And I know that other people have had this insight. And some people get very angry when they have this realization, because they don't want to be told that they do not exist.
Well, they don't want to have the ego annihilated
I know.
and to be shown the truth of the reality, which is that you are nothing, but through that being nothing, you have access to the everything.
That's right.
And it's only through knowing that you are nothing that the whole display of the everything can then unfold before
That's
you.
right.
So it's a tremendous initiation.
It was powerful.
It's
It was
the-
profound.
it's reality, isn't
It's the ultimate.
Yeah.
It was perfect timing. This all came up at the end of May. And for his teacher, that means summer recess.
Yes.
So I had very little responsibility teaching that summer. And I was very fortunate because for many weeks, my primary experience was ecstasy every
Yes.
single morning.
And that is lucky, because sometimes the Kundalini
Oh.
awakening can go through great suffering.
Oh, terrible,
You
terrible.
were blessed to have
I felt I was
ecstasy after
very,
ecstasy.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
At
Oh,
the
I know
beginning,
that.
at the
Or
beginning.
later, yes.
Yes, and it went on all summer long,
God.
and I had many wonderful ecstatic experiences. And then fall came, and I had to go back to the teaching role, and it was very hard on me. And then I began to have stress in my life,
Yes.
and both my parents got ill at the same time, and they lived about 3 hours away, and I'd have to go down and try to help them. And even teaching was stressful, though I was pretty much at the top of my form by then. And then I began to have all these aches and pains.
That's it.
And on top of everything else, I started having menopause.
Oh.
Well, is it energies or ecstasies? Is it menopause or Kundalini? Who knows? But it was all mixed up together, and so it was a difficult year. And the ecstasy went away, and I began to have a series of intermittent aches and pains, because Kundalini will do that.
Yes.
It is like it has a mind of its own, and it will go through your body, and if there are blocks, if there are mental blocks, if there are emotional blocks, if there are physical blocks, it can cause great pain. And it's like a pressure, it's like an energy pushing, pushing, pushing until it clears that block, and you think, aha, I survived that, and then you'll go back and integrate, and then there'll be another session, and there'll be another block that has to be cleared.
One of the greatest contributions you've made to us is that you kept a diary
I
from the
did.
beginning, and then we sat and edited it, and
I
then you
certainly
produced this
did.
wonderful book, which has become a classic for people on the Kundalini path. And there are hundreds of thousands of people being birthed
Now
in
that's
this
true.
way, and every one of them should read this book, because you're so honest about the ecstasies, the raptures, the amazing phenomena that come, but you're also so honest about the moments of terror and doubt and sadness and the ordeals in the body
And
that are
ordeals in the
part
body.
of this evolutionary process.
Ordeals in the body.
We're being changed from one kind of creature into another.
Precisely.
And that's
Precisely.
the key, isn't it?
And this is why, now, you must remember that at the time in 1981, almost nothing was
Nobody
known
knew
about
anything.
Kundalini
Right.
in the West.
Right.
I had no teacher. I had no guide. Believe me, there was not a plethora of gurus in Kansas at that time.
I can believe
So,
it.
and I had no one to talk to. I think to me, that's part of the saddest part of the journey. you need a buddy.
Yes.
You need somebody to tell you're having these incredible experiences, and you need a person to share them with. That's what I always tell people who write to me now. I say, if you possibly can, find a buddy just to share with them the things that are happening.
But of course, in that time, the atmosphere had not changed as it has. There's
Oh.
been this great spiritual renaissance. If you talked about it to your friends, they might have thought you were utterly raving mad.
Absolutely.
So you had to protect the experience.
And I know of people who were literally institutionalized.
Right.
And the doctors would always, if a person tried to go to a doctor or a therapist, often they would declare them schizophrenic.
Right.
And put them on medication, you know. So I just basically didn't tell. I hardly told anyone. I told 2 or 3 people. One person was a therapist, but she had fortunately spent time with Osho up in Oregon, and she gave a name to me. I didn't even have a name at the first for what was going on. And she said, "You have experienced ecstasy." I thought, aha, I've got a word, ecstasy. So, and then I told one other friend, a very good friend, I let her read. I kept a journal, and I let her read the journal. And she was all for anything that had to do with freeing the body, although she was not into Kundalini, certainly. So, but there was nobody around, so for about 15 years, I kept this experience basically to myself and wrote a journal. And my partner and I stayed together, but she did not understand what was happening and was very jealous of the experience because I had taken off on a different path.
You had another lover. It was living inside you.
That's right.
Right.
The beloved within.
Right.
So that was what happened in Kansas.
Darling, when did you start to write poetry?
I started to write poetry in the 1st grade. I joined my first poetry writing group, but they had to send me into the 2nd grade because the 1st grade didn't have a poetry circle. But before I met you, I had actually written a very different book of poems.
Oh.
And at that time, I was very smitten with the Great Mother. I had run across Eric Neumann's great book on the Mother. I had, and of course, all these
Women's
writers.
studies, feminism, and the Great Mother were all connected.
Feminism was on the rise. The Goddess was on the rise. And also, I'd been very taken with the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell.
Right.
And I had read Joseph Campbell, and I'd read Carl Jung, and I'd read writers of that ilk. And so I wrote a book of poetry, but it was focused mostly on the hero's journey and the great goddess. But I had not written any poems of the kind that I wrote later after I met you.
You have to be marinated a long time in the visionary experience.
I think so.
Before you find the voice that's unique to you.
I think so.
Yes.
So I had moved to San Francisco in 1988. And I was now, in 1981, when I had the experience I just described, I was 53 years old. So I was now 60 years old, and I took an early retirement, moved to San Francisco, walked into Field's bookstore, walked over to a shelf that said Rumi, picked up a book of poems by Rumi, and I said, "Who in the world is this?" Then what happened was that I was auditing classes at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I discovered an author named Andrew Harvey, who had written a book, a spiritual memoir, called Hidden Journey.
Right.
And I thought, oh my, there's somebody else in the world who's on a spiritual transformational journey. I didn't know anybody else. And I thought I would give anything at all, to meet this person. Next semester, he shows up. He's been hired as a special lecturer at the university, and I was able to audit his class. I thought, yeah, this is an Oxford guy. He'll show up in tweeds with leather elbows. He'll probably be pulling on a pipe, you know. He'll probably have a pot belly. And so class began. Well, this young, darling, vibrant person, this guy, went into the room, leapt upon the podium, turned around, wrote on the blackboard, "Only the fire eaters know the flame." And I thought, oh my God,
what you get away with when you're young.
I said, this is a live one. Oh, I've never seen anything like this. And it was a class on Rumi. And it was became a very famous class because it later was the basis for a book that Andrew wrote. But that class grew and grew and grew until finally there wasn't even floor space to sit on. I was lucky enough to get a chair. But Andrew, this marvelous teacher who didn't have us dissect the poems the way I had been taught in graduate school, rather he would read the poem and he would say, "Now, would you please just shut your eyes and think about that?" And then he'd read it to us again, and we would shut our eyes and we would think about that. Well, I thought what a wonderful way to teach poetry, to let people savor it and imbibe it and experience it rather than try to dissect it. Well, that was a wonderful semester, and I began going in to visit with Andrew, and I did take him some poems of mine, and I thought, good heavens, I'm just like all these students that I have who keep bringing me these terrible poems that I have to try to find something nice to say about. But anyway, I did it, and he was very kind, and he gave me what is called a Sufi kiss, which impressed me terribly, and which is not actually a lip kiss at all. It's a mouth to hand, and so I took him.
I really, in a way, just served as God's instrument to give you permission to plunge into this experience and pour it out.
That's right.
I was the instrument chosen. I didn't do it. It was our destiny that we met.
I think it was destiny because nobody else had loved those poems before. And so Andrew said, "I like your poems. You must write a book of poems." And I said, "Andrew, you are kidding me. I can write a poem now and again, but I certainly could not write a whole..."
Look at this torrent that was unleashed. Look at what happened after that.
Well, I started writing poems, and I wrote Marrow of Flame,
it's a magnificent
which in some ways I think might even be the best poems. They do have Shakti power. That's the key.
They're initiatory poems. They came out of your initiation.
Came out of my initiation.
They're marinated in your initiation,
yes.
But they carry an invisible, deep blessing punch. They are
well, somebody said,
poems.
and I think this must be true, that these poems have a power beyond these words.
Yes.
The words are very simple.
Yes.
But people can be affected by them. Some people can be.
Oh, very much
Some people can be. So I wrote that book, and then Andrew, with the help of Andrew, and my word, he was gracious and helpful, he helped me edit down Unmasking the Rose.
Well, Dunning, don't say... I have to tell you, it was a great honor because nobody has ever kept a diary of the Kundalini awakening, and I knew that in that document there would be something priceless for everybody. And when I was reading it, I was so helped by your formulations because I've been through...
You've been through...
multiple awakenings, and I recognized so many things that I hadn't recognized. So it was truly a mutual exchange. It was a great joy to trim that manuscript and then to present it as we managed to do.
As we did, and it was actually published. I find that, again, it's people who've been through a similar experience who resonate with that book.
Everybody who's been through the Kundalini experience that I know carries it around with them and refers it to them. It's the classic account.
Well, that's very encouraging. But when you edited it, I thought, well, good heavens, Andrew is a master editor as well as a master writer. It was brilliant what you did.
Well, I have to cut my own wildness down to be able to hedge it into...
It's hard to do your own. It's hard to do, really hard, because you don't see. But after you took passages, I thought, no wonder he took that out. I understand what is happening. So those two books came out, Marrow of Flame, and Andrew wrote a brilliant introduction. And again, I always feel like his accolades are such that it might be appropriate to somebody about to receive the Nobel Prize. But
well, let's have a Pulitzer instead of the Nobel. It's time the Pulitzer was awarded to somebody who's really breaking new ground. Dorothy, what happened to you as you became known in a small circle of devotees and of people on the spiritual path? Didn't many people come to you for advice and they begin to understand that really now part of your life is about helping people?
Now it's very much focused on that because I went through, the Kundalini continued its work. Very intense at the beginning, as I said, but through the years, and it's now been over 30 years since this awakening occurred, it got softer and gentler and subtler. I was still doing my morning practice. It finally got down to the point where all I had to do was roll my eyeballs one left and right, and I could feel these wonderful thrills. But then it got even softer to that, and now it's hardly there at all. But that's fine.
No, that's the perfect state. Last night we were talking,
Yeah,
you remember?
yes, I
and
do.
I said that St. John of the Cross says that the real state at the end of the journey is the glowing embers in the fire.
Yes.
And at the end, after all the burning, comes the glowing.
All right.
That soft, real, ordinary presence. That's the self. And that's installed in you.
Well, I feel that I hope that that's where I am now.
You
But
know you are.
about 7 years ago, I started a blog on Kundalini. It's called kundalinisplendor.blogspot.com. And people found that blog. Kundalini was beginning to happen more and more. People were beginning to know about it. And people started writing to me about their experiences. And at first, I was naive enough to suppose that they would be writing about their bliss and their ecstasy, such as I had. And I soon discovered that is not the case. Many people were having a terrible time. And every experience is different. Every journey is unique. And many times they would say, and I have no one to tell my experience to. And that's where I really resonated with them. And so I said, tell me your experience. And they were so happy that they could, just that much, that they could tell somebody that this marvelous thing had happened to them, but they had no one to share it with.
What you're doing is so beautiful, because not only are you bringing together at this moment in your life all of the poems in Some Kiss We Want and offering it for free to everybody, and this is our wild plan through all of this, you're also being available at this time in your life to people who are going through spiritual emergencies, so that you, somebody who has really been through the journey, can help guide others. And I think that's such a beautiful balance of creativity and service. It's really the key to your mission at this moment.
I feel it's what Joseph Campbell called bringing the gift back home at the end of the hero's journey.
Right.
And for years, it's true that I was virtually cloistered. It's true that I spent my mornings for year after year doing spiritual practice that did involve the Kundalini energies moving through the body. Somebody once defined Kundalini as God moving through your body. Right. And I will have to say that's what it feels like. It feels like at its best, and if everything is in alignment, then it feels like there literally is a beloved within. The beloved within loves you in ways you could never imagine before. But it's spiritual love. It's very different from sexual love.
Yes.
But it's, in a way...
It's profoundly erotic, but it's not genital.
That's right.
And that's the transforming experience.
And for me, it was never specifically defined as something sexual. Some people get into that. That's a different journey. That's a different journey. But for me, it always felt very spiritual. And then towards the end years, it would be like these wonderful feelings would come into my hands and arms. That might be all. And I never practiced Kundalini going up one by one through the chakras.
No, it happened immediately.
It happened immediately, yes. And I spent it. I have had more of a diffuse feeling, but it certainly put me in touch with my body. They say,
darling, we're coming to the end now.
All right.
Take my hand.
Yes.
What advice would you give to a young poet and a young seeker now, very simply, at the end of all of this?
Well, read those people you admire. Read Rumi, read Hafiz, read Kabir. Read any poet that you love, and let those impressions be imprinted on your soul and your psyche, and then you will begin to write like they do. That's the main advice that I would give to any struggling poet. And don't worry about if you're... I think it was James Joyce said he looked at some of his early writings hoping for signs of encouragement and didn't find any. So that's the advice I would give. Read those you love and associate with people you love. And try to find a teacher who will sponsor you the way I found Andrew Harvey. Find another Andrew Harvey.
I love you, darling. I'm so grateful.
I love you. I love you. I love you. Wonderful,
Bless
wonderful,
you, darling.
wonderful.
Thank you for this amazing journey. And
Well, thank
great
you.
work.
It's been beautiful. And as you said, who would have thought years ago
That here we would be.
that here we would be all this time later? But here we are.
But here we are.
Here we are.
God bless you, darling.
God bless you, my dear. Each of us is searching for a wise man or woman to lead us, to present us a scroll heavy with answers. Some of us have climbed the mountain, tracked the glacier's crust, lain down in snow for days, years, burning away to essence, preparing. Others have clung to the underside of overhanging rock until their fingers turned to stone, until they were riveted like lead to this thin edge of certainty. And others wander, drifting like mist through the valleys. What is it we are seeking? What will we do if we are brushed by this lion's mane? Every day a new flower rises from your body's fresh soil. Don't go around looking for fallen petals in a fairy tale when you've got the golden plant right here, now, shooting forth in light from your eyes, your awakening crown. Don't make lists or explore ancient accounts. Forget everything you know and open. This gift you have given me, who can say its value? I can only clutch it, wait for something more. How is it that you keep returning, even after the candle has long since died away? Even when I have given up the remains of my longing and gone to dream once more alone in my bed. These words you keep slipping into my mouth, this throat kiss, this terrible knowing of what it is to be loved. Now you are telling me it doesn't really matter how long this affair has gone on, when it began, who made the first move. You say this moment is pure honey. Drink. Listen. Can you hear those honey drops fall from the mouth of God? Can you feel the rose opening in your spine? Whatever you were before, now you are only this. Does anyone else feel this love? Like the breath of 1,000 rose gardens, dreaming that they are petals crushed in God's hands. There is some kiss we want with our whole lives. The touch of spirit on the body. Rumi. Yes, of course. That is the thing we want. Touch of spirit on body. Delight of soul enfleshed and opened, trembling at last. How could we not remember how it was before, when you were not there, when all we had was this cloud of longing and did not even know what it was we were looking for? Before I was named, I belonged to you, Rilke. Wherever I was, hidden in your thigh, a sycamore seed waiting in earth, a thought preparing to leap forth, I had no name. My body had no shape. My eyes were not yet opened. Even my face was dark. What are the features of that which does not exist? Nevertheless, I was yours. An unmarked impulse, a treasure you carried like a charm, hung from your vest before you sent me down. The saint is mad for rapture. She has learned to endure the passion of the God. She yearns for epiphany, to become nothing but ash. She must be cautious, or she may die like Danae in a dream of gold, or the Renaissance man who expired from an excess of joy. I and my beloved are one. Yes, of course. What good is it, this feeling, this ecstasy surging in the limbs, the heart, abyss of bliss which swallows you each day, stunning consciousness, silencing the tongue? What purpose has been served if the war, cancer, oblivious parent, or callous mate, with a blow or an unlucky turn of things, shatters the dream which is your life, weaving a dark stain over your gleaming spirit garb? The inscrutable advances, whirls us like milk spores over the rocks of the stream, force echoing force, life embracing life, dashing us along as if nothing mattered but this, the hammering wave, its forward rush, this riot of love across the weathering stone.